All right, that's almost there. For it. All right, now it's working. Good. All right. Except I have the volume on and I don't want to hear myself in an echo. How's everyone doing this morning?
Well, it's good to see you, Rabbi.
Good to see you too. Just give it one more minute for logins. And then we will get down to work because we've got miles to travel today.
I just got back from Pennsylvania. This looks like a much more complicated itinerary than mine.
Well, you know, there's complicated and there's complicated. As we'll see, this one is both complicated and not complicated. That's why we're going to be studying it. But yeah, we've got our usual people logging in. So why don't we go ahead and get things started? As you can see by the Safaria link, we are in Numbers 33, which is officially also the beginning of Parashat Masei. Now, this week is a double parasha of Matot Masei that happens in order to keep the Torah readings lined up with the calendar for a given year so that we can still read the whole Torah each year. But we're going to focus on chapter 33, and we're going to start off right from verse 1. And the subject should become pretty apparent. But as we go through and we read through this travel log, I want you to ask yourself, is this a travel log the way you would write it? What is the purpose of this list? Why is this being included in the limited number of words that the Torah has? So let's go ahead and begin. These were the marches of the Israelites who started out from the land of Egypt, troop by troop, in the charge of Moses and Aaron. Moses recorded the starting points of their various marches as directed by the Lord. Their marches by starting points were as follows. They set out from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month, also known as Passover, by the way. It was on the morrow of the Passover offering that the Israelites started out defiantly in plain view of all the Egyptians. The Egyptians, meanwhile, were burying those among them whom the Lord had struck down, every firstborn, whereby the Lord executed judgment on their gods. The Israelites set out from Ramses and encamped at Sukkot. That's Sukkot the place, not Sukkot the holiday. They set out from Sukkot and encamped at Etam, which is on the edge of the wilderness. They set out from Etam and turned about towards Pi Hahirot, which faces Baal Zephon, and they encamped before Migdol. They set out for Pnei Hahirot and passed through the sea into the wilderness. So we've just gone through the Shirat Hayam, the parting of the sea, and they made a 3 days journey in the wilderness of Etam and encamped at Marah. They set out from Marah and came to Elim. There were 12 springs in Elim and 70 palm trees, so they encamped there. They set out from Elim and encamped by the Sea of Reeds. They set out from the Sea of Reeds and encamped in the wilderness of Sin. They set out from the wilderness of Sin and encamped at Dofka. They set out from Dofka and encamped at Alush. They set out from Alush and encamped at Rephidim. It was there that the people had no water to drink. They set out from Rephidim and encamped in the wilderness of Sinai. So we finally are making our way down to Mount Sinai. They set out from the wilderness of Sinai and encamped at Kibrot HaTa'ava. They set out from Kibrot HaTa'ava and encamped at Hatzerot. They set out from Hatzerot and encamped at Ritma. They set out from Ritma and encamped at Rimon Perez. They set out from Rimon Perez and encamped at Libna. They set out from Libna and encamped at Risa. They set out from Risa and encamped at Kehelata. They set out from Kehelat, and encamped at Mount Shefer. They set out from Mount Shefer and encamped at Harada. They set out from Harada and encamped at Machelot. They set out from Machelot and encamped at Tahat. They set out from Tahat and encamped at Tarach. They set out from Tarach and encamped at Mitka. They set out from Mitka and encamped at Hashmonah. They set out from Hashmonah and encamped at Moserot. They set out from Moserot and encamped at Bnei Yaakan. They set out from Bnei Yaakan and encamped at Hor Hagidad. They set out from Hor Hagidad and encamped at Yovat. They set out from Yobat and encamped at Abronah. They set out from Abronah and encamped at Etzion Gever. They set out from Etzion Gever and encamped at the wilderness of Tzin, that is Kadesh. They set out from Kadesh and encamped at Mount Hor on the edge of the land of Edom. And Aaron the priest ascended Mount Hor at the command of the Lord and died there in the 40th year after the Israelites had left the land of Egypt on the first day of the first month. Aaron was 120 years old when he died on Mount Hor. Now, we get a little bit more of the travel when we go past the battle that happened there. Continuing with verse 41, they set out from Mount Hor and encamped at Zalmona. They set out from Zalmona and encamped at Punon. They set out from Punon and encamped at Ovot. They set out from Ovot and encamped at Ye Abarim. They set out in the territory of Moab. They set out from Iyim and encamped at Divon Gad. They set out from Divon Gad and encamped at Almon Divlataim. They set out from Almon Divlataim and encamped in the hills of Abarim before Nebo. They set out from the hills of Abarim and encamped in the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho. They encamped by the Jordan from Beit Yeshimot as far as Abel Shittim in the steppes of Moab. The steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, boom, now we get our crossing. Okay, so in our 50 verses, we have gotten ourselves from Egypt to the edge of the Jordan River to cross into the land of Israel. This is not what most people consider to be their favorite section of Torah. After all, it is just a list of names. And it's not even a list of names of people that are important in our lineage. And it's not even a list of names that we haven't necessarily considered. It's just, if you were to recount every single stop you made along your journey between here and Boston, for example, would you really need to include every gas station you stopped at, every place you stopped to stretch your legs, every place you stopped to use a bathroom? Really? We need 50 verses, more or less, of this? Is this Torah? Is this instruction? What in the world is going on here? All right, so any thoughts or feelings and reflections on this particular travel log? Does this seem like what you would expect from a travel diary? Remember,
I would wonder.
Mm-hmm.
I would wonder how long they spent at each place, because this is 40 years, right, of stop and go, stop and go, stop and go. So
Right,
you don't have, but.
That's right. So we have 40 years, and it's unclear from this how long we stayed in each one. It sounds almost like each stop was roughly equal. At least they're equal in terms of being mentioned. But in terms of time, it's very unclear how much time was spent at each place.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of our first major difference between this and what we would expect from
water or supplies.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
But Rabbi, when you say it, there appears to be I'm sorry.
Go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, I was saying about when you say that there appears to be, we don't know how much time they spent at each stop. That isn't quite true because there is a dividing point with Aaron's death. We know that the first 38 took place over 40 years. But then we have 8 that appear boom, 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 one right after another, right as they're about to, reach the final home, final place. So there is an acceleration at the end.
You're right. We do get a couple of fixed points. We have the Exodus from Egypt, of course, as our start. We have the arrival at Sinai. We have the death of Aaron. There are a number of fixed points that allow us to divide up the travel a little bit more clearly than just saying they are all homogeneous steps along the way. Additionally, like you said, once we put that into our frame of mind, we might be able to see a different pattern that's going on here. And in fact, that pattern could become a good means for interpretation. So maybe with that as our transition, that there are patterns that are layered within this, if we think carefully about the way it is listed, that there might be more to learn from it. Let's go ahead and look at the commentaries who have tried to learn from this, various different lessons and insights. So we're going to pop over there, and I need to zoom that in because I forgot to hit zoom before we started. There we are. So we're going to start with Rashbam. Rashbam is Rashi's grandson, and even more than his grandfather, Rashbam really did try to write what he considered to be a very much pshat, simple in the context explanation of the verse. And when he looked at the verse that said, these are their journeys, he said, the Torah reviews all the journeys to list the locations they were camped. Right, that's it. Right, it is just pretty much a straightforward itinerary. Now, he's not explaining why, and he's not saying there wasn't a reason, but he is just saying that the locations where they camped did matter. And that is the primary function of this text. It is then up to us to try and uncover why that would be a useful thing to include, rather than just, letting us dig through the text to uncover the different locations that have been mentioned in the past. Hopefully, as we went through that, some of those locations at least stood out to you a little bit more than others. So Vikatav HaKabbalah tries to give us another idea of what we could learn from this list, and especially the fact that there this long version of all the names. He argues, we learn from this that the names of these places that are mentioned here are not the actual names they had before. So he's interpreting this listing as saying that this was the naming of the place, perhaps even the renaming of the place. They are, in fact, the names that were given them as a result of the events that took place when Israel camped there. That is in and of itself why he mentioned afterwards the name of their encampments, because the names themselves describes the event that took place. So what he is arguing is that if you look at the names carefully, you will not only be able to remember the travels that we went on, point A to point B to point C, but by remembering the names, you'll remember the deeds associated with those places. Most famous and perhaps easiest to call to mind would be the location Marah, where we can easily remember the issue of the bitter water and the bitter arguing that took place at that site. And so too the other names, if we study carefully and deconstruct them, we can be reminded of many of the events that took place during our travel out of Egypt. And the names are there to remind us of the events. So this would be almost a mnemonic, if you will, that if you can remember all of this list, then you'll be able to remember most of the very important incidents that took place during this 40-year period. That's not entirely perfect, because not all of the names fit perfectly within that rubric, but it is definitely handy. And if you go through and review the names and review the events, it is a good way to get a short synopsis of much of what's happened up to this point for our ancestors. So it'd be like going on your trip, and rather than saying we went to rest stop 23, you would say we went to the rest stop with the pelicans, because everybody remembers that it's the pelican rest stop because that's where we saw the pelicans, or that's where the pelicans stole my French fries, or whatever it is. You're giving it a unique name that may not have been the name of rest stop 23 before you got there, but that's the name you're going to remember it as in order to remember the significant event. Make sense? All right, so far, not too bad. But Sforno is going to get us to think a little bit more deeply of why we would have this list. And he's really drawing on the fact that it says that God commanded that Moses reiterate this list. And God wanted, he argues then, all the journeys to be recorded in order to complement the Jewish people who had followed him blindly through the desert where nothing grew, so that as a reward for their faith, they would deserve to enter and inherit the land of Israel. So Sforno is saying, look, God wanted to be very, very clear that we went to all of these nowhere places, which is why for any ancient person listening to this list, they would have said, where's that? I mean, who ever heard of that place? I mean, yeah, we heard about it in the Torah, but no one lives there now. The Sinai is an undeveloped desert at this time. Desert, by the way, is a technical term in Hebrew that has little to do with precipitation, but more to do with whether or not it is considered settled and inhabitable. So that's why often you'll see it translated, the word midbar, as wilderness rather than desert. It's not about sand dunes, although certainly that can be a midbar in Jewish thought. It's about whether or not it's fit for human habitation. So Sforno is saying this long list was to say, I took them here, and I took them there, and I took them to this nowhere place, and I took them to this nowhere place, and they still followed me. That is amazing. And so when we finally got to the good place, the land of Israel, you better believe they absolutely deserve to get in there. Yeah, we had some problems and some trouble, but the fact that they were willing to follow me on this ridiculous itinerary going to places nobody ever heard of and where nothing even grew, that is their merit. That is to their credit. And that is why they get the land of Israel, that we did earn the land of Israel by the travel. Questions or comments? All right, so we're going to move on then into another concept of this being to our praise, this time from Bamidbar Rabbah, from the great Midrash collection. So it starts off with a halakhic question. Is one who is pursued by non-Jews or bandits allowed to transgress the laws of Shabbat? Right? Somebody is chasing you to kill you. Are you allowed to do things that would normally be a violation of Shabbat in order to save your life? Our rabbis taught, one who is pursued by non-Jews or bandits is permitted to transgress the laws of Shabbat in order to save his life. Absolutely. Right? Someone's chasing after you. You are allowed to get in your car and drive, even if it is on Shabbat, in order to save your life. All right. Now that we have the basic halakha, let's see some examples of this. Thus, we also find with David, when Saul attempted to kill him, he fled and escaped. So we know from the Torah, from the Tanakh, that this happened. And our rabbis then give a story of a more, for them, contemporary issue. Our rabbi said it once happened that they came to the leadership in Sepphoris with harsh orders from the Romans, right? They know that the Romans are coming and that the Romans are going to be imposing hardship, which will almost inevitably lead to either suffering or death. They went and said to Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, Rabbi, what do you say we should do? Should we flee? They're asking him for advice. He feared telling them to flee explicitly. Now, it's unclear why he was afraid to say this explicitly, perhaps out of a fear that the Romans would punish more if he were to give this type of instruction. Perhaps he didn't want to cause direct panic. So he hinted to them, why are you asking me? Go and ask Jacob. Moses and David, right? So he is giving a hint here. What does it say about Jacob? Well, Jacob fled, taken from Hosea 12. About Moses, Moses fled from Exodus 2. About David, David fled and escaped, right? We've got a long history of running away. So running away when there is in danger, even in violation of Shabbat, but especially when it's not Shabbat, seems like a very, very Jewish thing to do. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to them, such great ones were fearful and fled from those who hated them. Yet for those 40 years that you were in the desert, I did not let them flee. Instead, I felled all their haters before them, in that I myself was with them. Not only that, but I did not allow the animals to hurt you, scorpions, snakes, etc. Therefore, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses,